the weird aspect of Star Trek fans has been overplayed. There are some strange ones, yes. Some of those strange ones, strangely enough, are very brilliant people. They're very, very brilliant, high IQ, very interesting people. They are people who think in ways that we don't find very common. Some of those are the kinds of people who are the dreamers about the future, who lead scientists to ideas that could be accomplished for the future. Scientists very often are good at putting together hardware, but the idea, the concept, comes from the imagination of some of those people that you might refer to as weirdos. And I understand, perhaps they dress strangely, function strangely, and so forth, but some of those thinkers are very vital in our society. I would say that the fairest way to describe a Trekkie, which has become kind of the name of the Star Trek following, is to say that they are intellectual groupies. They are really, by and large, very bright people. And I'm delighted with the kind of feedback I get from most of them. Yes, I get a lot of stuff about it. Pointed ears, occasionally somebody's totally hung up on that and can't get off of it. But a lot of them are very stimulating people to talk to and to be around.
Well, not only could I get off of it, I've spent the first half of the program not talking anything about the specifics, but I would like to talk. I'll never get out of the studio alive, knowing who's sitting out there waiting, if I don't talk a little bit about the Spock makeup and the Spock things that he did. The ears, clearly the most telling feature. Do you have them at home?
I have one pair. We went through about 150 pairs of ears during the 3 years of shooting. A pair would last about 3 or 4 days of shooting.
Now, how was it put on?
They're a tip that fit on the top of my own ear. They were made in a casting process, in a mold, made of my own ear, and then designed so that they fit so perfectly and are put on so carefully and so well that even with a very close camera close-up, you cannot tell if it's properly done, you can't tell where the piece ends and where my own ear begins. And what happens is with the putting on and taking off with each day's shooting, the very delicate edge would get frayed after 3 or 4 days, and you'd have to go to a new pair because then it would become more and more difficult to disguise the connecting line. The ears were one of the first things that Gene Roddenberry talked about in the design of the character. The coloration of the skin was very tricky. At first he thought he wanted a reddish skin, kind of an Indian bronze kind of look. But the problem was at that time there was still a lot of black and white TV sets around. And on a black and white TV set, the character would have looked black. It looked black skin. So we went to a kind of a greenish yellow look.
And I read that it's because of the ears you almost didn't play the part.
No, that's not true. We had trouble getting the ears properly fixed, properly adjusted. But there was
no, but I mean, you had real trepidations about people just taking it like a Mickey Mouse.
I was concerned about the whole character. But once I made the decision to play it, there was never any question about whether or not I would wear the ears. Well, the point was that when Gene Roddenberry first described the character to me, he said, this will be a character with pointed ears, man from another planet. I was pretty serious about my acting, and that sounded kind of like, gee, that's Dumbo time. I don't know if I want to get involved in that. I got a fairly reasonable reputation going as a good, serious character actor.
And as a teacher.
And as a teacher, yes. And I thought, what will my students think? But in any case, several conversations with Gene led us to some very exciting and very meaningful studies of the internal life of the character, who he was and what he was all about. And that, for me, those were the predominant things that convinced me that I would play this role. Of course, the fact was, to be really honest about it, it was the first really steady work that I had ever been offered as an actor. I'd never had a job that lasted more than a couple of weeks in 15 years of acting.
So here was a nice gig for an out-of-work
Steady job, yeah.
Boy, if you knew then.
The thing really worked. Yeah, if I knew then what I know now. Talk about steady work.
But I heard that with the ears, you were promised that if it got to be too much after the first 13 weeks, and you were really the laughing stock of the series and of Hollywood, that they promised that they'd give Spock an ear job.
Yes, that came out of the fact that we were having trouble getting the ears properly done. In the early stages of developing the makeup, before we ever shot the first pilot, we were with the wrong makeup people, and they were making ears for me, experimentally at first, that really looked grotesque and funny and just really bad. And we went through 3 or 4 of those sessions. And as time got closer to the first day of shooting, once you start shooting, you're locked, that's it, you've established it. And as the time for the shooting got closer, I became more and more concerned about the look. And I said to Gene, this isn't working. We really got to reconsider whether or not we should have pointed ears in this character. We had the eyebrows worked out and the haircut and the skin tone, but we could not arrive at the right pair of ears. And finally, it was Fred Phillips, who became the makeup man on the series, who was in charge of the makeup on the series, who knew what was wrong. And the problem was that the studio had made a commitment to these other people to make the ears and didn't want him to go elsewhere because it would cost more money. But he said, we must, and forced the issue and went and got me a good pair of ears, and that solved the problem.
What would you have to go through each morning? What time would you have to hit the makeup?
I got there at 6:30 in the morning, and we started shooting at 8, so I was in the makeup chair for an hour and a half.
You were in that long?
Yeah, an hour and a half.
Gee.
Well, I think there are a lot of ladies that spend that much time in makeup.
Were the ears painful?
Occasionally. There is...
What exactly would they do? Would they just simply, would they smear your ear with something and then put it on?
They just put some what was known as spirit gum, which is a glue. It's a makeup glue right on the tip of the ear, and then slip the ear on and just...
I mean, they put around the whole rim of your ear?
Yes, around the whole top edge of the ear.
Did it in any way fasten itself to the front and the back of your ear, or was it just a surface thing?
Over the top.
Over the top?
Over the top, over this area right here.
Mm-hmm.
And once in a while, in here, there would be a little rubbing. Sometimes if it didn't fit perfectly, there'd be a little friction, and my skin would get a little sensitive. And that was an occasional problem, but nothing severe.
Did you take them off every single day after work?
Why wouldn't I?
Well, you know, if you're really working late one night and you're going to have an early call the next morning,
if
I just go home and sleep like this, you know, it's like the lady...
No, thank you. No, I wouldn't drive through the streets wearing those ears.
Well, no, but Spock, in one episode, wore a Russian hat. Of course, in Hollywood, that was as ridiculous as the other.
No, I took them off every night. I've never been asked that question before.
Really? I got a question that you've never been asked before. No, it just seemed to me that it would be a real time saver if you had just been able to leave them on.
Well, you know, I never thought about covering them or leaving them on. They wouldn't have held up during the night. If I rolled over and rubbed them, they would have pulled loose or torn.
Did they ever pull loose during the shooting, during the action sequences?
Once in a great while, somebody would rub against it or something. We'd have to stop and refasten them.
We used to play a lot of practical jokes on you.
You can't get off the ears, can you?
Yeah, I just did. I was going to talk about the practical joke they played on you with your bicycle.
Yeah. It's amazing. You know, that whole story came out of a book called, I guess, The Making of Star Trek.
I forget which one it was.
And which is a very fine book about the making of the show, several hundred pages of good information. And the one thing that people confront me with most out of that book is the fact that there was a story in the book about the fact that the cast and crew played games with my bicycle and hid it from me. I don't know why that fascinates people and captures their imagination so completely.
Because they know Spock and they don't know you, and they assume that you must be like Spock. And what would it be like to hide Mr. Spock's?
Well, I had a bicycle on the lot, which is not uncommon. The studio lots are sizable, and it's a big time saver to get from the stage to the studio, to the production offices, or to the commissary, where they have to go, to jump on the bike and ride rather than walk. And I'd keep the bike parked, as many people did, outside the soundstage. And what happened was that somebody borrowed it one day, asked me if they could use it, which would happen. I said, sure, I'm not using it, go ahead. And they'd take it someplace, and then forgot that they had borrowed my bike and walked back. Now I come out to look at my bike, and it's not there. So I come in and acting, really, you know, putting it on. I'm saying, now where's my bike? Come on. You know, I left the bike out there, and I let somebody use it. Where is it? Well, that's how it started. From that time on, they started hiding the bike in various places. And it got to the point where they had it hanging from the rafters, from the ceiling on the sound stage. And they had it, I got a big chain from the prop department, a big heavy chain, the kind of thing you could anchor a ship with, you know. And I chained it to one of the sets. And the prop guys, as soon as I was gone, the special effects guys got an acetylene torch and cut right through the chain. I came back, and there's the chain hanging there and no bike, you know. And then I thought, I'll fix them. I put the bike inside my car. It fit in the back seat of my car, which was parked outside the soundstage. And it was in there about 15 minutes, and somebody came to me and said, you better get your bike out of the car because they're gonna jack up the car and roll it away. You know, I thought, that's it. I give up. You guys can do whatever you want with the bike.
There was a lot of that shenanigans that went on.
You need it.
And the interoffice memos, and people ought to read those books, because and your book too has it in them.
Yeah.
They're really priceless.
You need some humor because the work is very intense. People ask, was it fun to make Star Trek? The answer is, it was hard work to make Star Trek. Fun comes in the release kind of stuff that we're talking about now. But you need that release because the work is intense. It's 12 hours a day with a lot of pressure. It's always the clock that you're fighting. And every time you do a scene, you wish you had another 10 minutes to try it once more because you know you could do it better if you tried some new little touch or something. And you just can't. You're under constant pressure. The show was not a big budgeted show. Most people think it was. It was not big budgeted. We were very limited in budget and therefore very limited in shooting time and had to work fast, and the pressure was intense.
We'll talk about the budget on the show. Most people know about the beaming down process, but could you just explain why that happened? And how
why the beaming down process happened? Well, that's the transporter process where we move people to and from the ship onto the planet's surface and so forth. And it was a very inexpensive way, really, of getting us onto planet surfaces. If you try to show a ship landing on a new planet each week, that's a very expensive process. It calls for model cities, it calls for mock-ups of the ship, dummy things, and a lot of expensive photography and special effects and so forth. The transporter device is very simple. It's a very simple film dissolve. It's not expensive, and that's how that happened.
If I could get, when you were talking about the camaraderie on the set, it made me wonder, what was it like for you when the cancellation happened? You had been living so intensely with these people, all of you.
Well, I don't really know that I can speak for everybody connected with the show, but the third season, for me, was not a happy year. We had a new producer who, with all due respect to him, really didn't have a feel for what Star Trek should be and what it was at its best. And the scripts that he was buying for us and that we were shooting during that third season were not our best by any means. We had some good shows in our third season, but we also had some of our worst shows in our third season. And my feeling at the end of the third year was that if the show were to continue, I would want to see some drastic changes take place to move us back into the territory where we rightfully belonged, which was really fine science fiction with good, interesting ideas in the scripts. That had not happened during the third season, and I couldn't make my voice properly heard to the people who should have or might have been listening, and I felt very frustrated. I was, under those conditions, I was not anxious for the series to continue. So it was kind of maybe it's best to finish now and leave it alone, let it be what it should be. And I've heard Bill Shatner say maybe Star Trek should just have run 3 years and be left alone.
And one won't know until it's done again, and if that succeeds.
That's right.
Yeah. About picking up the thread of the makeup again, we're done with the ears now, and the hair. You simply combed your hair straight forward in bangs.
Yes.
No wig.
And cut. No, I never wore a wig. It was my own hair. My own hair was cut quite short and cut very precisely, kind of a military, semi-mechanical look. And
did you push the bangs over after shooting was over, or did you go home with the bangs?
No, I just wore it loose. I never bothered to try to change the look of my hair.
Well, it wasn't really loose. I mean, it looked really sculpted. It looked brought down, cut right across, and sprayed or something to keep it in place.
Yes, it was sprayed.
And you just let it go that way?
Yes. I didn't wear the spray when I went out in public. I mean, I just washed it and wherever it fell. It was that kind of haircut that I didn't have to worry about.
The eyebrows fascinated me because I just assumed they shaved half your eyebrows and drew a pencil.
That's exactly right. Well, not quite. We did shave the outer half of my eyebrows, and the rest was not pencil. Was hair that was laid on by the makeup man each morning. And the hair took as long to put on as the ears did.
How high up on your forehead would they take?
Oh, they'd get up to about, I can't see on myself where I'm pointing, but I guess it's about here. They'd come up to a curve about like that. And the hair was very precisely, very carefully laid on, hair by hair each morning, the false hairs that went up. And that took quite a bit of time.
Did you ever get tired of all that?
The makeup? Mm-hmm. Yes, but I found it a useful time because during that time as the makeup went on and I could see it going on in the mirror, I could begin to relate to the character and begin to start functioning and thinking as character. Fred Phillips, who did the makeup, told me that he could see it happening to me. as we started working, as he worked on my face, he could begin to see the change in attitude take place and see Spock arriving.
And they shaved off the other half of your brow
The other half. No, not every day. It wasn't necessary. Once a week or so.
Were you wondering whether it would ever grow back?
Yes. Before I did it, the very first time, I contacted several doctors, dermatologists, and so forth to ask them whether it would grow back. They said, yes, if your beard continues to grow, your eyebrows will continue to grow. So I took that at face value. At the end of the third season, I must say they weren't coming back as fast as they had come back at the end of the first season. I was a little worried about that.
Can you, just for the set, can you do the Spock raised eyebrow again? Oh, Lord, yeah. That's,
if I work hard at it, I can do it.
Does it work in reverse, the other way?
That happened by accident. I wasn't thinking about that. Somebody said something to me in a scene, Bill or DeForest Kelley or somebody, and I just responded with that. And I guess when they saw it in the rush of the dailies the next day when they looked at the film, I guess it broke them up in the projection room. So they'd start to write it into the script. They'd write in things like Shatner or Captain Kirk says such and such. Dr. McCoy says so-and-so cut to Spock, he raises an eyebrow. You know, that kind of thing.
You were complaining that during the third season, that sometimes that's all you were expected to do.
Well, what happens is that when the writers start to get tired, or when the producers are not really being, or the writers are not being terribly creative, the tendency in a series is to go back to and keep reusing those things which are working, and perhaps work them to death, rather than use them creatively or look for new creative ideas. So they would have me saying logically, constantly, all the time. I would be saying logically and fascinating forever. And they'd have me raising the eyebrow, you know, that kind of thing. And they'd have McCoy saying, you green, pointed-eared elf, over and over again. And they'd have Captain Kirk saying to the gentlemen, I can't have this squabbling in my crew, you know. And they'd have Jimmy Doohan saying over and over again, Captain, this ship won't stand warp 8, you know. It gets repetitive because they know that those are safe things to go back to because they work.
Let me, if I can, get into the Vulcan hand sign.
Okay.
It's a fascinating story. Has to do with your religious background.
Yes.
And I think I'd just like it if you could just tell it for a minute.
Well, it was during the first season. We were doing an episode called Amok Time, and it was Spock's year in heat. It was the Vulcan cycle, mating cycle.
What was it called?
Once every 7 years, Pon farr. And we were, Spock had commandeered the ship and was forcing the ship to go off its... It was something like, welcome home, Spock. And I said, gee, shucks, it's great to be here, or whatever, you know. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice if we had some kind of a special greeting that Vulcans exchange? And the director said, what did you have in mind? And I suggested this. Now, the reason that the Vulcans would do that when they greet, and this is a thing that came out of my Jewish, Hebraic background. The fact that I was raised in an Orthodox Jewish family, and at the high holidays in temple, at a particular point in the services, the priests, the Kohanim, the priests of the congregation, bless the congregation. And they say a familiar prayer. They say, may the Lord turn his countenance unto you and give you peace, and so forth. And when I was a child, I was told, whenever that happened, you turn your back on them. The congregation turns their back and doesn't look because there's something that you're not supposed to see. The theory being that, or the tradition being that you don't look at somebody who's blessing you. You must be more humble than that. So naturally, I thought there's something very mysterious going on and I'll sneak a peek. And these fellows were doing this to the congregation. Well, I learned to do that. It fascinated me, and that's how it got into the Star Trek show. What it is a symbol of the letter Shin in the Hebrew alphabet. That is the shape of that character in the Hebrew alphabet. And that letter Shin is the first letter in the word Shaddai, which is the Hebrew word for the Almighty. So they're using a symbolic representation of the Almighty's name to bless the congregation. And that's how it got introduced into Star Trek. I did it, and she did it, and that became the Vulcan greeting.
And if people see you on the street, do they...
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And you give it right back?
Oh, yes. Sure.
Do you ever make a mistake or like that?
No, but I had somebody do that to me one day. I hope it was a mistake.
Could you talk for a minute about the Vulcan mind meld?
Yes, that was Gene Roddenberry's idea, and a brilliant idea. it came up. He came up with so many wonderful, rich, imaginative pieces of writing for us, and that was a very good example. This was a script where we were dealing with a character who was in a very bad mental state and had some information that we needed to get from him. There had been a very lengthy scene written between he and I and Captain Kirk, where we're questioning him, and he's babbling. And we're taking pieces out of his conversation, saying, I think he just said so-and-so. And then Captain Kirk would say, that sounded like such and such. That together with what you understood, Spock, I think he's trying to tell us. A very verbal, very unimaginative scene, really. Kind of an exposition scene, not too well done. Well, Gene rewrote it. And when the scene came back, he had created this Vulcan mind meld idea that Spock, in a very painful and tortuous process, painful to himself, would mate or meld his own mind with this man's mind and get through all of that difficulty and all of that distortion that was taking place in the mind to another level of this man's consciousness where he could get this information out, you see. And in order to do that, in the process, he would mate his own mind with this gentleman's and therefore would go through the depth of the pain that this man was going through and experience it. But obviously, Spock would pay that price because the Enterprise needed this information, you see. So we did the scene, and then, I put my hand on his face in the proper way and kind of got close to him and mated my mind with his and did the scene as Gene had written it. That's how I started. It was simply a very imaginative way to do what could have been a boring exposition scene.
Please stop me if I go too far, or just tell me no, but I've often wondered what it felt like to be one of the actors who was getting the mind meld treatment. Could you do it to my face? It felt like.
I don't know if we can really create the proper conditions. This is not to be taken lightly,
No, I understand that.
See, which side should we do this to?
Well,
I guess see it here?
I guess so.
You turn your head a little bit that way. The finger goes. It's been some years since I've done this.
It's a really careful.
Oh, yes. All right, now I'm picking up some interesting things. That's the general condition that you would be in. Did you feel somewhat controlled?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Did you have to stare at the person?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I did it once to a rock creature,
It was very curious feeling. I mean, you carefully placed the hands on...
Well, I'm finding you. You don't just put your hand on somebody's face and make contact, You have to find the person.
Was that your shtick, or was that...
Yeah, we kind of developed that as we shot it. I did it once to a rock creature on the show. Did you ever see to a creature called the Horta? One of our best shows, really.
I was about to say Gorn, but I know...
No, it wasn't the Gorn. The Gorn was one of those things. This was a rock creature that was a mother protecting its eggs that we were destroying. And I discovered that when I did a mind meld with it. And it was a very exciting...
You ought to try it on a pet rock sometime. How about the Vulcan neck pinch? That's the main other bit that I can think of.
Well, that came up because we were doing a show called The Enemy Within, where Bill Shatner... It was our version of the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde idea. Bill Shatner as Captain Kirk had been split into two personalities by a malfunction in the transporter. So there was an evil Kirk and a good Kirk. And he was split into these two separate entities. And obviously we had to get the two back together again so we could have our proper Captain Kirk again. In a confrontation scene between the two of them, the evil Kirk was going to kill the good Kirk. And the scene as written called for me to sneak up behind the evil Kirk, pull out my phaser and hit him over the head with the butt of it. And I thought that was rather crude for Spock to do on Star Trek in the 22nd century. Yeah. So I devised the idea of knocking him out by pinching the nerve centers in his neck.
And it was tried out on somebody. Then Shatner played along with it, didn't he?
Yes.
When you tried it out.
Well, Bill understood what I was after. He was playing, of course, both Kirks. He was playing the good and the evil Kirk. And when I came up to him, when he was playing the evil Kirk, and I said, I'll put my hand here, and he'd go unconscious, and he just kind of throws up and drops. That was the way the famous Spock neck pinch was born.
You've been very open and very generous about talking about Spock and doing it. And I'm wondering how you feel about actors who absolutely flee a certain role, the way Dennis Weaver left Chester the way Pernell Roberts left Adam Cartwright, because they just felt they had to get away from it, that they, they'll never think of me as anything but Chester or Adam Cartwright. And yet you live very comfortably with Spock, it seems, and yet go on and do other...
Well, I respect both Pernell Roberts and Dennis Weaver as actors greatly. They have to make their choices based on what they see that their future to be and what their condition is as actors and the roles that they're playing, and I have to make mine. I know them both, and I have never really intensively discussed it with them. I discussed the Bonanza Adam Cartwright thing with Pernell somewhat, and he just didn't want to be identified with that character much longer. He played it as long as he felt he wanted to. And the same with Dennis Weaver, I'm sure. I left Mission Impossible after 2 years because I felt there was no longer a challenge there for me, and the work became repetitive, and the studio was nice enough to let me out. I had 2 more years to go on the contract, so I essentially did the same thing in that case. If Star Trek had gone on longer, I might have begun to feel that same pressure that Dennis and Pernell Roberts felt in their characters. But let's put it this way. If I had my choice of the 3 characters that you've talked about in this particular case, Chester, Adam Cartwright, and Spock, and someone said, you are going to be identified with the rest of your life, for the rest of your life, as the man who played one of those 3 characters, which one would you choose? I would choose Spock. Mm-hmm. I would rather be identified as Spock than Chester or Adam Cartwright. With all due respect to those characters and the great work that those actors did in those characters, I'd rather be known as Spock. It's kind of fun.
Such as a magnanimity of the man, yeah.
Yeah.
How do you feel? Do you own the character Spock?
No. No, the character belongs to Star Trek, which belongs to Paramount Studios.
So you couldn't don the ears and the whole thing and go open a supermarket?
I have never considered doing it. I've been offered a lot of money to do it, and chances are, if I were of a mind to do it, which I'm not, I could go to Paramount and say I'm going to do this, and they would either say, okay, go ahead, it's good for the show anyway, and they're making a lot of money off the syndication, the reruns of the show, which I'm not. None of the actors are, but they are happy to see the show perpetuated because it means continued income. It's possible that they might ask me for a percentage of my income, some fee for the right to let me do it, or something, that there might be some reciprocal process going on.
If they wanted to do, would you endorse toys as Spock?
No.
Or any of that commercial stuff?
No. I'm willing to endorse certain products as Leonard Nimoy, but I have never given myself as the Spock character in an endorsement situation. I've been asked to and been offered a lot of money to do that, and I've never done it. I feel that Spock exists only properly in the Star Trek situation.
What if they redid Star Trek and they cast somebody else as Spock?
That would be interesting.
You wouldn't be crushed?
No.
Don't you really consider them yours?
Maybe I wouldn't be crushed because I feel quite secure that that's not going to happen. I doubt very much that the studio would try to recreate Star Trek and a new actor as Spock. I think probably the more intelligent thing for them to do would be to try to create another character with another actor to replace Spock if for some reason or other we couldn't get together. If they didn't want me as Spock, or if they didn't want the Spock character.
Could you tell me a little bit about your family? You've been married for, I don't know how many years?
21 years.
To Sandy.
Yes.
And you have children?
I have 2 children in college. They're both at UC Santa Barbara. And one is an art major and the other is a political science major.
Are they Trekkies? It must have been fascinating for them to go through the whole thing with you.
They respect Star Trek. I don't know what would qualify one as a Trekkie, but they certainly are familiar with the show. And they respect the show.
Is it a big deal to have my daddy's Mr. Spock type?
They know me as their father and as an actor. My profession is acting. Mm-hmm. And we have a very good, healthy relationship that's not involved in images or, that kind of stature stuff.
Do you watch many of the Star Trek episodes?
I watch them occasionally, yes. I travel an awful lot with the college lecture dates that I do and the plays that I do on the road and so forth. I'm very often checking into hotels and motels late afternoon. I turn on the TV set maybe to try to catch the news, and there's Star Trek. If it's an episode that I'm curious about, I will sit down and watch it. Because it keeps me current in terms of my feelings about the show.
Can you, within the first 10 seconds, or can you, by looking at a still photograph, immediately tell what episode it is?
Probably.
You know it pretty well.
Probably, yes.
Yeah. I've already mentioned the one book that you wrote, and I just didn't want to end this without at least telling the viewers a little bit more about you by telling you about some of the other books, the other two books that you wrote. One is called You and I, and one is called Will I Think of You, and they're both books of poetry with your own photographs.
Right.
And they're beautiful little books.
Thank you.
Just tell me about what inspired.
Well, it started with the photography. Really, I'm very, very involved with photography, and my work, having taken some courses and studied it intensely, got to be good enough that I wanted to try to get it some exposure, to get it published. My wife brought home a book one day from a bookstore that was a combination of poems and photographs, much like these, and I thought perhaps that's the way to do it. And I started writing some words, and the next thing I knew, I had enough material for a book, and I sent it to the publisher of the book that my wife had brought home. They were in California, not far away, and they agreed to publish the first one, which was You and I. It did very well, so I was encouraged to do a second called Will I Think of You. And then I felt ready to tackle the Spock book, because it's a book that I've been thinking about for some time, and decided to do that next. So that was the sequence.
Are you a rich man?
I would say relatively, probably that's true by most people's standards.
Yeah. Well, euphemistically, he says it's a rich experience me having you here this afternoon. I can't believe we're out of time, and I just want to really thank you for coming.
I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
And thanks also to Millersville State College.
Right.
I'm Bill Varney. Thank you for watching. Good night.